The wooden deck of the ship lay completely silent under a thick, unforgiving layer of solid ice in the dead of winter. A single mistake in these freezing waters meant certain death for anyone aboard before the pale morning sun could even touch the horizon. But the legendary pirates of the 18th century refused to surrender their wooden vessels to the brutal, freezing forces of the open ocean. Instead of freezing, these outlaws engineered brilliant survival systems using layers of stolen wool, glowing hot iron cannonballs, and sheer physical endurance. The brilliant methods they developed to stay alive in the darkest nights challenge everything the world ever believed about these ruthless outlaws. The freezing ocean winds slashed violently across the open deck like invisible blades, tearing through regular clothing in a matter of seconds. To survive this brutal assault, the pirate crew built their first line of defense using carefully structured layers of heavy stolen garments. A thin linen shirt sat directly against the dirty skin, constantly pulling sweat away from the human body during intense physical labor. Over that fragile foundation, thick woolen garments trapped precious body heat inside a tight, incredibly comfortable pocket of warm, life-saving air. Finally, heavy outer coats made of thick, oiled leather successfully blocked the endless, freezing sea spray from reaching their fragile human bones. But a desperate pirate could still face absolute ruin if those carefully chosen protective layers got completely soaked by a rogue ocean wave. This critical moment of danger was exactly where heavy wool became an absolute miracle fabric for the exhausted men on the open ocean. Even when completely drenched by freezing salt water, a thick woolen coat miraculously retained more than half of its vital, life-saving insulating properties. Wise sailors would quickly wring out their dripping clothes instead of removing them entirely, knowing that damp wool offered a solid fighting chance. Down below the dark wooden deck, makeshift clotheslines hung tightly between heavy support beams, keeping wet garments completely safe from the raging storm. Protecting the vulnerable human head was another absolute daily priority for any weary sailor facing a brutal winter storm on the dark water. The classic wide-brimmed leather pirate hats worked perfectly to aggressively channel freezing rain away from the face and the highly sensitive neck areas. Underneath those heavy leather brims, tight cloth bandanas completely covered the ears, perfectly preventing crucial body heat from escaping into the freezing night. The absolute most valued items on captured merchant vessels were never shiny gold coins, but simple dry woolen socks found inside the cabins. Desperate freezing men stuffed their heavy leather boots with dry yellow straw, or simply wore multiple thick layers of stolen socks for protection. Freezing human hands received crude mittens crafted from scrap leather, carefully leaving the trigger finger completely exposed for sudden, highly violent combat encounters. The thickest military coats offered incredible external protection against the biting wind, but keeping the human body truly warm required powerful internal fuel. Surviving a brutal winter voyage demanded massive amounts of daily calories to keep the internal human organs functioning perfectly in the freezing darkness. Hot, spicy peppers brought back from tropical Caribbean raids quickly transformed into absolutely precious winter treasures aboard the isolated, frozen wooden sailing vessels. The incredibly spicy seeds triggered a genuine physical reaction, violently forcing the human body to increase internal blood flow and raise its temperature. Paranoid cooks closely guarded their highly limited pepper supplies during winter storms, strictly saving the hottest batches for the absolute coldest night watches. Heavily salted chunks of meat served a vital double purpose for the freezing, exhausted men gathered around the dark wooden tables below the deck. The incredibly dense animal protein required tremendous physical human energy to properly digest, generating a steady, comforting wave of heat inside the stomach. Hard-baked ship biscuits provided incredibly dense, slow-burning carbohydrates that successfully kept a freezing sailor completely alert throughout a miserable 6-hour night watch. The absolute most famous maritime legend involved heavy daily drinking, But smart pirate captains knew that strong, dark rum was a deadly winter trap. A quick, aggressive swig of dark alcohol created a wonderfully deceptive illusion of fiery heat, burning straight down the weary sailor's dry throat. In brutal reality, the strong liquor actively lowered the core human body temperature by dangerously dilating the vital blood vessels located near the skin. Many incredibly careless sailors felt wonderfully warm after drinking a full heavy flask, only to be found completely frozen solid the very next morning. Instead of relying on deadly alcohol, the desperate crew brewed rough, steaming versions of hot tea using whatever dried green herbs they could scavenge. Freezing, exhausted men gently cradled these rough wooden cups in their incredibly numb hands, slowly absorbing the precious liquid heat through their scarred palms. Cooking these hot daily meals presented a massive, terrifying challenge on a moving wooden ship where one open flame could destroy absolutely everything overnight. Resourceful ship cooks heavily relied on large communal iron pots to make thick, heavy meat stews that perfectly retained their vital heat for hours. Hungry men would carefully wrap warm-cooked food in dirty scraps of cloth and tightly tuck it inside their heavy winter coats for later. A completely full stomach successfully provided crucial internal warmth, but the surrounding freezing air still demanded a much more aggressive, highly creative external solution. Generating an actual open fire on a wooden sailing vessel surrounded by highly flammable tarred ropes created an incredibly dangerous daily winter survival paradox. A single stray glowing orange ember could incredibly easily turn the entire floating fortress into a massive, inescapable burning inferno within a few minutes. To safely and effectively manage this terrifying daily risk, the brilliant outlaws utilized heavy enclosed metal containers with tiny ventilation holes for their fires. These small, highly prized metal boxes perfectly allowed the precious radiant heat to escape into the freezing room while firmly trapping the deadly sparks. Carelessly leaving the heavy iron lid even slightly open was a massive, unforgivable mistake that could easily earn a young cabin boy a brutal punishment. Fragile glass navigation lanterns brilliantly served a vital double purpose during the absolute longest, incredibly dark periods of the freezing winter ocean voyage. Shivering, desperate sailors would slowly rotate their tired bodies around the glowing oil lamps, carefully warming their frozen, cracked hands during the midnight watch. Heavy black iron cannonballs, normally used strictly for violent maritime destruction, were brilliantly transformed into portable heat reservoirs during the absolute coldest ocean nights. The dedicated ship cook carefully heated these solid metal spheres directly in the kitchen fire until they glowed a dull, incredibly warm cherry red. Exhausted sailors carefully wrapped the hot, glowing iron spheres in thick layers of scrap cloth and gently placed them inside their incredibly freezing beds. A single heated iron cannonball could successfully radiate gentle, comforting warmth for several hours, strictly making the difference between restful sleep and violent shivering. Traditional sleeping arrangements also changed dramatically as the absolutely desperate crew abandoned any foolish illusion of personal space to survive the freezing winter temperatures. Up to 6 fully grown men would sleep tightly pressed together in a defensive circular formation, perfectly sharing their crucial internal human body heat. Stolen luxury items like incredibly expensive Persian rugs and heavy silk tapestries were aggressively nailed directly against the interior wooden walls as crude insulation. These thick, stolen decorative fabrics brilliantly created tiny pockets of dead, trapped air that successfully stopped the freezing ocean wind from penetrating the wooden hull. The absolute most coveted areas of the ship were the small, perfectly insulated wooden captain's quarters located deep near the protected center of gravity. Successfully trapping the precious heat was absolutely essential for daily survival. But a perfectly insulated room meant absolutely nothing if the exhausted men stopped moving. The bitterly freezing ocean air possessed a truly terrifying, invisible ability to slowly drain the physical energy from even the absolute strongest human muscles. To combat this incredibly silent threat, brilliant pirate captains developed a remarkably strict ship culture that violently forced absolutely everyone to stay in constant motion. Hoisting the incredibly heavy frozen canvas sails required tremendous explosive upper body strength, instantly generating a wave of internal heat that lasted for hours. During particularly brutal, unforgiving cold snaps, a clever pirate captain might order completely unnecessary sail changes strictly to keep his freezing crew physically working. Aggressively scrubbing the wooden deck beautifully shifted from a basic, boring maintenance chore into a vital, life-saving physical exercise during the absolute darkest winter months. The incredibly continuous physical bending and highly aggressive scrubbing pushed hot, oxygen-rich blood all the way down to freezing toes and numb leather boots. Directly because of these forced daily physical routines, the ruthless, terrifying pirate vessels operating in northern waters often boasted the absolute cleanest wooden decks. Climbing the massive, terrifying web of frozen ropes to safely reach the highest observation post demanded intense physical coordination and incredibly brutal human effort. The absolutely terrifying lookout shifts in the totally exposed wooden crow's nest were strictly limited to 15 minutes before the brutal wind caused instant frostbite. Simply aggressively climbing up and down the frozen wooden mast directly generated significantly more human body heat than actually watching the empty, dark horizon. Intense combat training with heavy wooden practice swords became a truly frantic daily routine, strictly to keep the exhausted crew completely alert and wonderfully warm. Violent mock battles and aggressive knife-throwing competitions kept the hot blood violently pumping through the veins while simultaneously sharpening their incredibly deadly martial skills. Loud, rhythmic music and heavily aggressive stomping dances proved to be surprisingly powerful daily tools in the relentless struggle against the freezing ocean temperatures. Heavy leather boots loudly stomped against the thick wooden floorboards in perfect unison, generating intense physical friction and massive amounts of healthy human sweat. Deep below the freezing deck, cramped dark wooden spaces completely transformed into makeshift gyms where desperate men engaged in fierce arm wrestling and aggressive push-up contests. The completely exhausted but triumphant winners safely received extra portions of warm food, successfully creating a fierce competitive environment that kept the entire crew active. Constant physical exhaustion successfully kept their fragile bodies alive in the terrible darkness. But the absolute ultimate survival strategy involved happily leaving the freezing ocean entirely. The smartest maritime outlaws quickly realized that the single best way to survive a freezing ocean was simply to completely avoid it. Unlike strict military ships bound by rigid naval orders, a pirate vessel possessed the absolute freedom to change its destination. As the bitter autumn winds began to blow, dozens of heavily armed wooden ships slowly drifted southward toward the warm Caribbean. Historical maritime records clearly show a massive surge in violent pirate activity near tropical islands between the months of December and February. The pristine waters surrounding the Bahamas became so crowded with armed outlaws that local merchants constantly feared highly organized attacks. Foolish pirate crews that stubbornly remained in the freezing northern waters routinely lost a full fifth of their men to severe frostbite. Those brilliant sailors who successfully followed the warm sun maintained their full fighting strength, losing men only to violent tavern brawls ashore. When unexpectedly forced to stay in freezing regions, these weary sailors became absolute masters at locating the most sheltered coastal harbors. Crowded port taverns served as vital, unofficial winter rescue stations, offering incredible hours of glorious warmth beside a massive, roaring stone fireplace. A single restful night sleeping safely by a blazing tavern hearth could easily mean the difference between a long life and death. When safe coastal ports were completely unavailable, the desperate crews constructed temporary survival camps using heavy canvas sails stretched between massive trees. Stolen luxury wooden furniture from captured wealthy merchant vessels routinely ended up smashed to tiny pieces and burned in these crude fire pits. Expensive decorative Persian rugs became thick insulated tent floors that successfully kept the freezing ground chill safely away from their sleeping bodies. Some highly organized crews even dug semi-permanent wooden survival shelters into remote hillsides, reliably returning to the exact same hidden spots every winter. What truly separated a highly successful pirate crew from a completely frozen wooden wreck was their incredible ability to adapt to extreme environments. They fundamentally altered their thick clothing, their daily diet, and their entire physical routine the exact moment the ocean winds turned dangerously cold. These absolutely ruthless historical outlaws survived not merely by fighting the brutal winter, but by brilliantly outsmarting the ice with incredible human ingenuity. Encerramento. That's the end of another journey, and if you enjoyed it, leave a like. Stories like this end, but they rarely leave your memory. Subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.